Some details in this episode are graphic and may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised.
It's a case that took many by surprise. The details so horrific and violent.
He grabbed some tape and started taping her hands up. He gets some machete.
A senseless murder committed because a woman wouldn't stop talking.
He was telling her that she needed to shut up and just be still for a while. Well, otherwise, she wouldn't like the result.
This is South Texas Crime Stories, The Murder of Nicole Perry.
On the afternoon of November 19, 2020, Bexar County Public Works employee Oscar Flores was asked to go pick up trash that was off South W.W. White Road. The area was a known dump site and often had trash left there. When he and his coworker arrived, they noticed several bags. While a couple of the bags were easy to pick up, the other two weren't so easy, and one of them ripped open. Here's Oscar Flores speaking about the moment he realized he had made a horrifying discovery.
And I noticed hair, long, thin hair, which is usually I would think it was a dead animal, but the hair looked too human to be an animal.
Flores said he also noticed a silver necklace sticking out. He immediately called his supervisors, who called the Bexar County Sheriff's Office. In the first two bags picked up inside were pieces of cloth and napkins with blood on them, kitty litter, and a pair of shoes. On the side of the shoes, Niki was written on them. Inside the bigger bags were two blue bins, and inside the body of 31-year-old Nicole Perry, also known as Niki.
It would be a few weeks before anybody knew what actually happened to Niki. New details would come out when a man named Rafael Castillo was arrested in early December, almost a month after Niki had been found. The affidavit for his arrest revealed disturbing details.
Niki had been brutally attacked and murdered inside a known drug house in the 300 block of West Harlan Avenue on the city's south side. Two witnesses had told police that Rafael had attacked Niki, cutting her hands off with a machete and striking her in the head with an axe.
Afterward, he made her boyfriend and another woman clean up. It would be almost 2 years later that the full story of what happened to Niki was revealed as Rafael Castillo headed to trial.
Hello, KSAT viewers. I'm Stefania Jimenez, anchor and reporter at KSAT 12 in San Antonio. On weeknights, you'll catch me on the Night Beat. Many of you want the news before 10 p.m., and this is for you. It's called The 9 at Night, a live 9-minute digital newscast airing at, you guessed it, 9 p.m. Call it a bite-sized show that's tailor-made for you. You'll get the day's top stories, weather, upcoming community events, and feel-good stories. Find us on YouTube, KSAT.com, and KSAT Plus, available on Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV, Roku, or any way you stream, and of course, via podcast. So like or subscribe wherever you get your audio. That way you'll get the alert when each episode drops. That starts later this month. Until then, head on over to KSAT.com and sign up to be a KSAT Insider. That's where you'll get the inside scoops on all of our new and exciting projects.
Rafael Castillo cut off her hands and buried an axe in her head because he did not think that she showed him appropriate respect.
That was prosecutor Jennifer McDaniel in her opening statements during the trial. Now, Lee, this trial lasted about a week, and it's one that I will never forget.
Yeah, just hearing some of what came out in court, the graphic, gruesome details, I can only imagine it's something that's going to stick with you.
Yeah, it was, I oftentimes say being in court can be hard. There's images one should never have to see, and I felt for those jury members because they had to see some really tough images and hear some very hard details on how this woman died, and all because she wouldn't stop talking or she showed a lack of respect.
I can't wrap my head around that. Someone can say, okay, you know what? You're not going to stop talking. Let me just do this to you. That's a cruel person to also think that they're that entitled that they have the right then to decide, okay, you won't stop talking. I'm going to make you stop talking. And this is how I'm going to do it. That blows my mind. And, this all went to court. So what charges is Castillo facing in this?
I know while the trial was going on, we kept getting viewers and our readers curious why this wasn't a death penalty trial. And as it was explained to me, he was charged with first-degree murder because there was not another crime committed in the act of this murder. Usually when it's a capital murder case, there is maybe an aggravated robbery, there's multiple people that have been killed, or it's a death of a police officer. There's other circumstances, but this wasn't one of them. And as I was explained by one of the local judges here, is that no matter how horrific the details are, we can't change the law. That is the law. It was just first-degree murder, which also led to a whole other thing. He was out on bond. Castillo was out on bond the entire time leading up to his trial. His bond was set at $500,000, which means he was able to make a $50,000 bond. It was a little nerve-wracking. I'm going to say, you hear these details and you're like, why is this man just walking around?
Yeah, that's not somebody I would want to just happen across at the grocery store, walking my dog out in the park alone. That's not someone I would feel safe with just hanging out about.
Well, he was under house arrest the entire time. He wasn't even allowed to go to church on Sundays. He was just allowed to stay in his home. And apparently he followed all the rules while he was out on bond before the trial. But there is that saying, it's you're innocent until you're proven guilty. And that's what happened here,
Right. And let's also, if we can, obviously you're the expert here, talk to us about that house where everything went down, because the details, he made her boyfriend and another woman who were there clean up. What happened there that led up to all of this?
So just a little background on Niki, and the prosecutor made it very clear in the beginning, Niki was no saint. She was a drug user. She used methamphetamines, her and her boyfriend. And they were living in this house at the time, and not really living. They had really just gotten there that day after they were evicted from their home and were kind of homeless, and they called the friend. So this house on Harlan, just to kind of give you a picture, there's a main house, and in the back there's a detached garage that was kind of transformed into a living space. So the person who lived there, along with his girlfriend, Rafael Castillo, who was his cousin, and then there's Nicole Perry and her boyfriend. So there's 5 people inside this very small area. But this entire house, the detached, people are going and coming all day long. It is a known drug house that was on police's radar. They've, done busts there before. Multiple people were in and out. So there's a lot going on. And it was extremely messy in the inside of this detached space. They didn't show pictures of the main house, but of the detached area, there was trash thrown, there was tools, there was a motorcycle in the middle of a room, there was a hole in the wall that they kind of made into another separate little room. It was chaos inside of there. So that kind of just gives you a picture of how they were living, what the circumstances were, and despite that, I think it doesn't matter. No one deserves to be killed or die in that manner.
Right. Just because you're living, and it's often referred to as a high-risk lifestyle, doesn't mean you're necessarily deserving of a crime to happen to you. No one is deserving of something like that to happen to them. So just because her way of life was different than what you or I might choose, or what our average listener might choose, doesn't mean that she brought this upon herself.
Yeah, and so one of the main witnesses, because this all took place with those 5 people pretty much in the room at the same time, if you can imagine that. And one of the main witnesses was, of course, Niki's boyfriend, Randall Fulgham. And Randall kind of describes to us, or not to us, but he describes in court what actually happened. And apparently Niki was known to be pretty mouthy, and if you told her to stop talking, she was going to get louder. And he had said she had been kind of in a bad state. Her dad had just died, and she was just not really taking anything from anybody. And for some reason that day, she just kept going and going and going. And eventually, Rafael Castillo had enough. But I want people to kind of hear Randall's account of what happened. This is from the trial. Again, this is very, very disturbing details. So just, viewer discretion here. If you don't want to listen to this, I would hit the fast forward button, because what Randall's about to say is what happened to Nicole.
He warned her about the stuff that she was saying.
Was she being frustrated?
Yes.
Was she being rude?
Yes.
Okay. Was she being violent?
No. He was telling her that she needed to shut up and just be still for a while. Otherwise, she wouldn't like the results. I kept trying to get her. She kept on talking. Even afterwards, she wouldn't stop. And I continued to try to get her to quit, because it looks like he's pretty much upset now. He grabbed some tape and started taping her hands up. I was frozen. At first, I thought it was a scare tactic. He gets a machete and he goes over to Niki, and he's looking down at her. And he's speaking, but I couldn't tell what he was saying, because I really wasn't paying attention to him talking. I was just watching Niki. And at some point, I'm thinking to myself, all right, he's gonna pick it up after. Put the machete back down after he picked it up. And he raised it. And as soon as he raised it, I already knew what it was going to do, and I turned my head, and I heard it hit. And it's a sound I won't never forget. She was on the couch at first, but then she ended up on the floor. She wasn't saying a word, but she was on her side. And she kept moving around, lifting her head up. She kept trying to look around. The only thing I could think of is she was trying to look for me. He went and grabbed a black axe. He swung it and buried it in her skull.
What did the defendant do?
Carried on as if it never happened.
Jeez. Wow.
And it doesn't, just looking at your reaction, this is something he will never forget.
I'm sure this moment plays in his head over and over and over again, maybe wishing, I wish I would have grabbed the machete away from him. I wish when she was looking for me, I would have pushed him away so he didn't end her life in this way.
Now, just to give you an idea, Rafael Castillo, about 6'4", maybe close to 300 pounds. He was a very big guy, while Randall, maybe 5'8", 5'9", very skinny, lean man. So I could see why he may have just been like, I don't stand a chance. I don't know what's going through his head at this time. And for all I know, they could have just all used meth before this. We don't know. That wasn't really discussed. But hearing him talk about that moment, it pains him. He now, claims he still has trouble sleeping now. Even afterwards, he lied to police at first, saying, he didn't know what happened. And then he went back and he was like, I have nothing to live for. Niki's gone. And he ended up going back to police and telling them the whole story because he was so scared of Rafael Castillo that he was going to come back and get him. Because at the time, Castillo still wasn't arrested.
I mean, absolutely. I think I'd be terrified too. If I saw what had just happened in that moment, the way that this person was able to just easily, it seems like, do this to someone else, yeah, absolutely, I'd be terrified. Absolutely, I'd be scared to go tell police. But that I'm glad he ended up making the right decision. It's just I can't imagine what that moment must have been like. I mean, like you said, I mean, he probably didn't stand a chance to stop this person and just kind of probably turned away out of his own, I need to save myself right now. But at the same time, I'm just like, that has to be a regret of his. I mean, it has to be. Like, why didn't I just try and step in? Why didn't I try and, hey, let me diffuse this situation? But then again, like you said, drugs are really bad. We know what meth does to people. It's going to change their thinking, their behaviors, their reaction times. That's scarring.
Yeah, and he wasn't alone there. Like I said, there was 2 other witnesses to this, and one of them was Vanessa Vargas, who actually had just walked in when she noticed Niki sitting there with her hands taped up and then Rafael attack her. She took the stand as well, and she too. I was scared for my life. He threatened me and my son's life. So she has that over her as well. But it didn't end there. After this attack, Rafael Castillo then orders both Randall and Vanessa Vargas to clean up and dispose of Niki's body.
I can't imagine what that must have been like for them to try and do that.
Yeah, and Randall said something that kind of stays with me. He had to take the axe out of her head and close her eyes. And he said, I closed her eyes and I whispered goodbye to her. Having to first witness this horrific act and then told to clean up your loved one.
No, I mean, I had chills just like hearing that. It just, clearly he cared about her. That's why he said goodbye to her. I think he probably was in an extreme state of shock in that moment and couldn't comprehend like what was happening around him. And that's probably like why whenever this trial was happening, he was still kind of in this state of shock. Like that's probably why he still can't sleep because of it. Because seeing something like that and then having to clean up after what had just happened to the person you cared about, that is sure to mess with someone's head for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and a big part of this story and what got a lot of people's attention when we first read the affidavit, when it happened, was her hands were severed. And Randall talked about what he did with her hands.
I'd forgotten to put them in with the body, and so I had nowhere else to put them. So I wrapped them in plastic and put them in a crock pot that was on top of that bookshelf.
I don't have words for that. That's in a crock pot?
In a crock pot. And her hands were never found. So what ended up happening, they clean up, they put her body in a blue, like storage bin, a blue tote, and wrap it up. And then another man that they called Gizmo, who lived in the house, Vanessa's boyfriend, calls a friend. And her friend shows up because he had a vehicle. The friend doesn't even know why he's there, other than he was told to come by and they needed him to dump some trash.
Okay, words of advice. If someone calls you and says, I need you to dump trash for me, always say no.
His name was Stephen Cleveland. He also took the stand. He was also detained. He's behind bars, but he came out to testify. And Stephen Cleveland told us, he's like, I got this call from my friend. I went. They put something in my car. Everybody knows you can go throw trash at WW White Road, so that's where I went. I go back to the house and they're like, oh, we forgot to give you this. It was the crock pot. He said he saw the hands and he fled. And he went to his sister's house because he was so like, he's like, I realized at that moment what I was told to get rid of. Yeah, and he was actually the first initial person to call police. Yeah. He called his lawyer because he was on probation, and he told his lawyer, hey, this is what happened. I may have been part of something that I didn't know about. What do I do? So the next morning they called police and he told them. And the next day, I think, is when Niki was found off the side of the road. But yeah, like you said, you never thought as you were dumping these bins, obviously Oscar Flores said they weren't light, they were heavy.
Words of advice, do not dump someone else's trash. Always say no. Or look through it, just so you know what it is, because you don't want to find yourself in this situation. And why are they going to ask you to throw away trash? That just doesn't make any sense. So we know about the cleanup. I imagine if you are on methamphetamines, you're not doing a great job of that cleanup.
The amount of evidence, I have yet to see so much evidence, physical evidence, rolled into a courtroom. Immediately when police go search West Harlan Avenue, they immediately find the machete that's thrown on the ground. They immediately find the axe, the handle sticking out from under the bed. They find kitty litter, which apparently was used in the cleanup to disguise the smell. They find a trash can with one of those disposable mop heads with blood on it, and paper towels with blood on it, a Fabuloso bottle, spray bottles, cleaning solutions. Like, there's just a huge amount of evidence left behind. And in those 2 bags that were left alongside Niki's body was her shoes with her name on it. You know, there was more kitty litter. There was a box with a receipt from Domino's that had Gizmo's name on it and the address. Like, there was just so much left behind. And it just baffled me that Rafael Castillo thought he could get away with this. One, he didn't help with the cleanup. Apparently, he just left and went on with his life. And, I think even both Randall and Vanessa said, like, he went on like nothing happened. Like, it was no big deal. He went inside the main house, and another witness in the main house who didn't actually witness the murder, but saw him right after, she sees blood on his shoes. She's like, what's that? Oh, he's like, it's just ketchup. Or it's, and then he's like, no, it's, it's something else. It's not blood. And like giggling and laughing, like it was no big deal what he had just did.
So yeah, what was his defense in all of this? What was his defense team's story with this?
That none of these witnesses were credible. They were all drug users. And mind you, yes, some of their stories' details were a little different. They couldn't tell you who was where, how long they were there, when they left, when they came back. But none of them faltered on the fact that it was Rafael Castillo who took a machete. They both knew the amount of times he swung it. Then he took an axe. And what she did on the ground, like, those big details were all very consistent. So yeah, maybe they weren't very clear on a lot. Like I said, these are habitual drug users. I'm sure with what the effects methamphetamine has, there's a lot of details, and some I'm sure they want to forget. But yeah, the defense was like, these witnesses are not credible. Obviously, some of them were behind bars. Some of them may have been here. Some of them may have been there. But they could never really say that it wasn't him. And that defense obviously didn't work.
Yeah, let's talk about, with as much evidence as they had, with as many witnesses as they were, it seemed like they drew a roadmap, and the only possible person, it was Rafael Castillo. How long did it actually take the jury to deliberate in this?
It took maybe a little over an hour, around an hour, and they came back with that guilty verdict. And then we went into what's called the punishment phase, and we've explained this before. This is kind of the second half of the trial, so where the jury decides how long to sentence a person to jail. It's anywhere from 5 to 99 years or life in prison is what's the standard, it's the law. So in punishment phase, we kind of learn a little more about Raphael. We have a expert on gang prisons take the stand, and apparently Rafael Castillo may have been associated with the Mexican mafia. He had several tattoos they showed pictures of that shows affiliation with the Texas Mexican mafia, and this drug expert was like, we have records of some of these tattoos in our databases of Texas gangs and prison gangs, and yeah, he has been flagged. Some of these tattoos have been flagged before, so that didn't do very well. And that was the only person the state put up. The defense, though, put up Castillo's sister and 3 family friends. And, you know, honestly, I felt so bad for her, the sister. Obviously, she loves her brother. Obviously, they didn't know this other lifestyle he lived. And they were very Christian family. Like, he grew up in a church. The other 3 friends had gone to the house to pray with him while he's on house arrest. Like, they knew this family for over 20 years. They've known him as he's grown up. And they're like, he's always been really respectful. We don't know what happened and when he veered off or what. But, you know, at that point, they were begging to not get a life sentence. And apparently it worked a little.
So how long did they give him?
I was almost a little surprised. I thought because of the extent of this crime and how horrific it was, he was going to get that life sentence. But they sentenced him to 70 years with eligibility for parole in 30 years.
So how old was he? I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but how old was he whenever this trial went on?
He's in his late 20s, so it could be like in his early 60s, late 50s. Now, mind you, you're eligible for parole in 30 years does not mean you're going to get out. I'm thinking with the extent of what this crime is, his affiliation with the Texas Mexican Mafia, he is not going to get parole the first time around or the second time around. It could be a few times before he's actually granted parole from parole board. But yeah, it's still there though.
That is very surprising. And I don't know if he had past criminal history or anything like that, but even if this was his first crime, even if he had never gotten even a speeding ticket, the way he killed Niki, I think that should speak to it. And you should give someone life. I don't care how good his history was, how good he grew up, what a great person everyone who loved him thought he was. He chopped off a woman's hand and put an axe in her head for talking. That's it. I mean, that's not someone I would want out on the streets again. And I very much so believe in the system that we have to reform people and put them out in society after they've learned what they've done and won't do it again. But that doesn't sound like a person who's going to get reformed.
Yeah, you'd think he had to, like the extent of this crime, there had to be, I don't know if it was drug induced. They didn't go over that during the trial, if he was on drugs at the time or not. But yeah, I just felt like that's 70 years for me if I was the jury member after seeing and hearing everything that was, displayed during this trial. I was, just walking, it was awkward enough walking around the hallways with him like pretty much beside me, knowing that he did these things. I wouldn't be comfortable walking around him in everyday life.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's very shocking, the sentencing he got. I don't know, did Niki's family speak at all during this?
One of her sister did testify toward the beginning of this trial, just to kind of give the jury an idea who she was and, kind of how her life changed. She was also a mother. They were not there for any of the trial, though, besides that testimony.
So we don't know how they took this sentencing.
A letter was read after the sentencing by the victim advocate from the family about kind of how they felt about this and how her children will never have her in her life. And she was never given the chance to clean herself up, to be a part of her children's life again. And that's what they took, and how nobody deserved to die that way. And I don't blame them. I don't think a family member should have to sit and see and hear what went on in that courtroom.
Absolutely not. I don't think I'd be able to sit through that if something like that had happened to my loved one either.
You kind of want them to still have the image of who she was and not how she left. And like I said at the top, this is one that I will never forget after sitting through this trial. And it was a long week.
Yeah, I mean, probably a jam-packed week too. You're getting a lot of information thrown at you at one time, and a lot of very gruesome and graphic information.
Yeah, and I thought that's why it was important to do an episode on this trial, because I'm only limited to so much to say on an on-air piece or on a web article, where here we could flesh out kind of what happened, who Niki was, who all the players were, who was all involved, how this kind of all got dealt with. And I would like to just say that in some sense, justice was served for Niki.
In some sense, definitely. I mean, even if her boyfriend didn't go right away, I mean, hats off to him for at least going to police once he had the time to process more and say something, so that it wasn't a mystery of what happened to her. And, and also to the guy who picked up the garbage who shouldn't have and dropped it off. Hats off to him for also saying something. I think that's what I've just learned throughout this is the biggest takeaway is you should say something. People deserve to have their voice. And if they have that voice taken away, someone needs to be that voice for them.
Thank you for joining us for South Texas Crime Stories. Next week, we'll have a new episode about a missing grandmother.